Thank you. Wow, what a great silent auction. I noticed though that the people bidding on the big vodka basket also were bidding a lot on the aromatherapy spa basket. So what's that about? Hey, at my table we have 5 sisters and their mother is celebrating her birthday. So I happened to find this outside. Her name is Diana, so if we could all sing a nice rendition of Happy Birthday to Diana, okay? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Diana. Happy birthday to you and many more. Who's been here before? Or I should say, who has not been here before? Oh, wow. Quite a lot of people. That is great because yesterday after the evening's event, some people came up to me and asked me why I hadn't told my library story. And I didn't because many people have already heard it, but since there's so many new people and we are celebrating libraries, I want to tell you a story about libraries and fame. And my own personal fame, thank you. I was at the Nokomis Library in Minneapolis, sitting by the fireplace that's never lit because of budget concerns. And I was writing by hand, and I heard up at Miss Lucy, our librarian's desk, a woman ask, "Yeah, say, do you have that tall pine polka by that Lorna Landvick?" And I perked up a little, and Miss Lucy said, "Well, I'll check and see if we have the book, but if you'd like to meet the author, she's right over there." So I'm always happy to speak to readers, and if she wants to read my books, all the better, but this woman was a talker. I knew what was in her crock pot that night. I knew that her husband had recent bunion surgery. Finally, she realized she had to head home and tend to that debunioned husband and that Yankee pot roast. But before she left, she got a real evil glimmer in her eye, and she said, we've met before. And I said, "Really, all this time chatting, where was that?" And she said, "Well, I was the nurse at your colonoscopy." She hadn't recognized my face. Try to leave that all behind me. Also a couple years ago, I and my good friend Bob Dylan wrote a song for this event, and I was speaking to him the other night, and he said, "Oh, you're gonna play with old good," and I said, "What?" And he said, "Oh, you're gonna play with old good," and I deciphered that he asked if I was gonna play the song again, and he said, "Oh, a sing-along, that's a great idea." So, you all have to join in. And I will personally shame tables that don't, that just sit there like this. All right. Come gather around book lovers on this special night. I bring people who read and people who write. I bring Brainerd Public Library and the literature that it lends to all truth seekers and to you, its friends. Hey, come on, sing. So let's for a little tippling until security was called. And, they drove us all the way on golf carts. So you're in for a real treat hearing them all. So they've all been on bestseller lists. They've sold internationally. They've won all sorts of awards. But what do librarians think of them? That was my question. So for you and you alone, I traveled the country to speak to librarians and hear what they had to say. My first stop was Newport, Rhode Island. What are you laughing at? Hi, the name is Veronica Vanderbilt, and I am the head librarian at the Newport Library in Rhode Island, which has the most beneficent friends in the country. Other than Brainerd, excuse me. I have to say this about this particular writer. Alan Eskins, he riles me up. I mean, have you seen his dust jacket picture? Now, that is not sexist, it's merely observational. All right, thank you. Table 21, you don't look so happy about that. Anyway, Mr. Eskins, he writes taut, exciting, suspenseful mysteries that will keep you on the edge of your chaise longue. His book, and I want to make sure I get the title right, The Shadows We Hide, that's the most current book. It's a sequel to his first book, The Life We Bury, which incidentally will be made into a feature movie soon. Personally lobbying for a walk-on part. Mr. Eskins practiced criminal law for 25 years. He gave it up to write full-time. And I say the law's loss is the reader's gain. Let's give it up for Alan Eskins!
Hey, how you all doing? I love coming here. I love seeing so many bright, shiny faces out there. This is one of my favorite events to do in the world. And I want to thank everybody for coming and thank the volunteers who put this on for letting me come and do this. When I do book events, I often get asked a question, how long does it take to write a book? And for me, my first book, The Life We Bury, took a little over a year. But my favorite book that I've written took me 28 years to write. And I'll talk a little bit about how that came to be. So it took me 10 years to get through my education. It took me 8 years to get my undergrad because I worked myself through college. And then I went to law school. And after that struggle, I get a job in southern Minnesota in St. Peter. And in 1982, I passed my bar exam, I get licensed, and I'm sitting in my lawyer office with my lawyer degrees on the wall behind me and my lawyer desk out in front of me, and I lean back in my lawyer chair and I say, Alan, what the hell have you done? You see, I never wanted to be a lawyer. I should have not gone to law school if that's the case, but it was never a dream of mine to be a lawyer. I went to college originally as a theater major, and there was this creative side of me that I really loved and had a passion for. And law school pretty much beat that out of me. And I wanted to do something creative. So I decided one day to write a short story. Now, I'd never written a short story before, but I wrote this short story about a 15-year-old boy growing up in Missouri, like I grew up, and in the 1970s. And I liked this kid. And it dawned on me that I didn't know how to write because I'd never taken the classes. So I started just reading books on writing technique. And I read a lot of books. And I started taking classes. And Iowa Summer Writers Festival at the Loft Literary Center. And I took a lot of classes. I eventually have 3/4 of an MFA degree from MSU. But over the course of 20 years, I took this short story and I expanded it into a novel-length manuscript. And I loved the story, I loved the characters, I really loved this kid. I wanted to give this kid a name that had a southern drawl to it. So when the readers would say it out loud, it would kind of sound southern. So I named him Bodie. Well, after 20 years of working on this novel, I realized it wasn't ready, and I couldn't put my finger on why. So I thought, what I'll do is I'll write another novel. I'll write a mystery. And I'll use that novel to get an agent, a publisher, and an editor, and then maybe they can help me with this manuscript and tell me what's missing. So I wrote my second manuscript, which became my first novel, The Life We Bury. And when I was writing The Life We Bury, I was creating this character who was a law professor. And in writing that character, it dawned on me that this 15-year-old kid in 1976 and this law professor currently are really aspects of my alter ego, who I am. So I made this kid in the first manuscript grow up to become this law professor, Bodie Sandin. So I wrote The Life We Bury, and I thought, well, I need an agent, so I started querying agents, a very demoralizing process. And I started getting rejections. And to distract myself from these rejections, I decided to write my third manuscript. Now, it was about this time that I realized that I was a writer. I was practicing law, I had a good career, but in my heart, I was a writer. I found something that I was passionate about. So I was just going to keep writing manuscripts until somebody finally gave up and gave me a contract. And so as I'm getting rejected over this course of this year, I'm writing my third manuscript. And by the time I get to the first draft finished on that third manuscript, I get an agent for the first one, The Life We Bury. Now, I was rejected by 150 agents for that manuscript. And my agent, after she took me on, we did a revision, we sent it out, got 2 offers right out of the chute. So now, I'm going to be a published author. But I had this third manuscript that I've been working on, and what I had done was, so my first novel was about a college student, and I didn't want to write mysteries about this college student going through life tripping over dead bodies. So I took a character from that novel, and I wrote a story about him. His name is Max Rupert. He's a homicide detective. So I went to my agent and I said, hey, I have this other manuscript I just wrote. Let's take it to the publisher, and let's get a 3-book deal. And she says, that sounds wonderful. What are the other 2 books about? And I said, I'll get back to you. So I came up with a 3-book arc for this character of Max Rupert. Went back to my agent, she liked it, she presented it to my publisher liked it. Now before The Life We Bury hit store shelves, I have 4 books under contract, and I'm excited. Well, The Life We Bury came out in October of 2014, and it came out to wonderful reviews. The following year, it was nominated for 7 different awards, including the Edgar Award. It won 3 of those. It became a USA Today bestseller. It stayed on the bestseller list for 15 weeks. It was a book club bestseller. It is translated into 26 languages now, and it is currently in development for a film. And this is a book that was rejected by 150 agents. But I'm writing this 3-book arc, and I'm in the middle book of those 3 books. And The Life We Bury is just taken off, and my publisher comes to me and he says, we want you to write a sequel. And I said, I have a great idea for a sequel. But the problem is, my character Bodie, Joe from The Life We Bury, I wanted Joe to grow up. So he's a college student in The Life We Bury. I want to start the next story when he's 5 years older. So I need to have him grow up for 5 years before I write the sequel. And my publisher points out that this is fiction. I don't have to wait 5 years if I don't want to. But I come to writing as a daydreamer, and these characters live in my head, and so I couldn't speed it up. I did the 3-book arc for Max, and then I went back to Joe, and it was like going home. Joe and his autistic brother, Jeremy, his girlfriend Lila, and his dysfunctional mother, Kathy. It was so much fun to write the Shadows We Hide, the sequel. And it was my perspective of writing. I'm a mystery writer, but my perspective is I want to use the mystery as a catalyst to tell a character story. And it is going back to those characters that I really loved. And I love all my books, but there's one book that I love a little more than the others. It's that book I worked on for 20 years. The one I set aside to try and figure out how to be a better writer. And over the course of writing these 5 novels, I learned so much. And I went back and I finished that novel. I rewrote it from beginning to end without looking at the original manuscript. And that book is coming out this year. It took me 28 years to finish it. It's called Nothing More Dangerous. And it is Bodie Sandin when he's 15 years old, growing up in Missouri in 1976. And it is, I think, my pride and joy. I'm looking so forward to seeing how it's received. How it's received this fall. It comes out in November. I did bring a ARC, advanced reading copy, to be auctioned off here today. And an advanced reading copy is a book that has not been through the copy editing process. You would think after 28 years it'd be perfect, but I was not very good at grammar in grade school. I fling commas like I'm a 6th grader at a food fight. So if you bid on that and get it, please be forgiving. I thought about doing a giveaway, but I had a recent bad experience with a giveaway at an event. I was in Waseca, and they have this brand new, beautiful arts center. And there's 50 people in this arts center, it's brand new, and I thought, well, I'm gonna give away a book today. So before anybody showed up, I put a Post-it note under one of the chairs. And when I got to give my presentation, I said, okay, one of you has a piece of paper taped to the bottom of your chair, and you get a book. So 49 heads drop down, and then there's this massive tearing sound that fills the whole room. And 49 hands shoot up with little squares of paper in them. They had torn the Underwriter Laboratory tags off of these brand new chairs. And the one person who did not look under her chair was the one with the Post-it note. So we had to actually go and give her the Post-it note. So I again want to thank you all for coming. I have a little pitch I want to give. There are independent bookstores throughout Minnesota, up here in the north, that are just wonderful bookstores. I've been fortunate to be invited to speak at so many bookstores. And I recently went to a bookstore event, and it was off-site, so it wasn't at the store itself. And I signed a bunch of books, and at the end of that, I asked the bookseller, how'd you do? How many did you sell? And she only sold a few. People had bought the books on Amazon and brought them to the bookstore event. And so I felt disheartened. I thought, people, I love independent bookstores, and I want you to love them as much as I do. Please patronize your local bookstores. My book coming out this fall, Nothing More Dangerous, is available on pre-order. You can pre-order through your independent bookstores. A lot of people don't know that. They will get the book and then mail it to you, or you can come by the store and pick it up. So just a little pitch for independent bookstores. Keep them in mind when you're purchasing books, and they're here today. So, with that, I would ask your indulgence. I'm going to switch hats.
My name's Carl Tibbetts. I'm the librarian from Joplin, Missouri. Now, there's supposed to be this lady writer coming here today, Christina Dalcher, wonderful, but she couldn't be here. She had a medical emergency, so we hope for the best for her. Yeah, but we got this other lady. She writes books, good ones. Her name's Lorna Landvick, and she writes about folks, and she spins some good yarns. And sometimes she makes me laugh, and sometimes she makes me cry. But that's okay. Well, she's got one out there now called The Chronicles of a Radical Hag with recipes. I don't cook. I like SpaghettiOs. That's okay. But it's a good book. So let's get her up here to talk to y'all. So, Lorna Landvick, please.
Thank you, Carl. You remind me a lot of Billy Bob Thornton, Carl. I think I can go home now after that introduction. Wow, thank you. Before I say anything about books or anything, I do have to point out a woman in the audience who is wearing the same top I wore last night. Do you want to stand up and model it? And I asked her, yes. I said, I wore that last night. I got it on sale at Talbot's. And she said, I got it at the outlet mall at Talbot's. So, you know, we dress right for Brainerd. So yes, Christina Dalcher couldn't make it, and we wish her the best. Her book, Vox, is about the loss of a woman's voice. Women are given, I can't remember the number, but they're only allowed to speak a particular number of words a day. Chronicles of a Radical Hag is about a long-time, small-town newspaper columnist who's written for 50 years until she is felled by a stroke that she receives after watching a local production of Guys and Dolls. How many have felt a little woozy after seeing a local production of Guys and Dolls? So, because she's so beloved in the community, the newspaper publisher decides to reprint past columns of hers that date back to 1964 and cover all sorts of big historical events as well as all sorts of big events in her own life, including her later in life marriage, her miscarriages. So she's very opinionated, as a columnist should be, but after she writes one column about keeping her name and not taking her husband's name, she gets a nasty letter from a Mr. Joseph Snell, who writes in that, she's nothing but a radical hag, and I don't like reading her lunatic ravings. And to mollify him, she prints a recipe for almond crescent cookies, which I urge you to bake because they're really good. Just don't bake them big, make them small. Because I was saying last night, I've been to some libraries and bookstores who have made these cookies for me, and they're a little generous with the dough, and they look like boomerangs. So just little pieces of dough. So, Toni Morrison recently died, and I had been reading a lot of obituaries about her and people's recollections, and she had said that why she got into being a writer was because she was such a huge reader, and then she couldn't find a book that really spoke to her the way she wanted it to, so she figured out, well, if I'm not finding the book that I want to read, I guess I have to write it. So I am in the midst of writing a novel, but because you're all readers, I thought maybe you would help me with the plot and characters of my next book. So please be loud and help me out because I've decided, I'm going to leave Minnesota. I have written books that aren't set in Minnesota, but most of them are. But this time I'm going to the far-off country of, where? Albania? Which is Tasmania's cousin. Yes, I am going to the far far-off land of Tasmania, because as everyone knows, Tasmania is very famous for its devils. And I am a bit of a cultist. And, you know, raised Lutheran, we have to look for action somewhere. I actually did travel to Tasmania last year, and it's a different world. I mean, they're not in the 20th century. I would actually say they live in the 15th. Yes, with chainmail and maces, and then of course they all have to find headwear to fit over those little horns. And so I thought, well, that's what my main character will be. She'll be a milliner. You know, because you have to be specialized to fit all these horny heads. And there is some sex in there too. But I'm kind of stuck right now because my Tasmanian devil hero, his name is Fred, which is, you know, in all Tasmanian baby books, the #1 Tasmanian name. So Fred decides he wants to go on a quest. You know, he's involved with this milliner, but he thinks, no, there has to be more in life than just hats that fit on our horns. So he decides to venture out with the very famous Jezebel. So yeah, I'm doing a little cross-traveling over centuries and getting a little biblical at times because it is a book about a devil. And although in my novel, Jezebel, you know, she's not a tart, as they say. She is more a, she's more a what? She's more like Bugs Bunny. Which is so right on, because I don't know if you know, Tasmania is infamous for its very poor orthodontia. And that's really why they became devils, because, you know, their teeth were so snaggly. And so he ventures forth as Bugs Bunny, and I think I do have the title. It's not going to be, "What's up, morning?" And instead it's going to be, I need a title here, people.
Tooth Fairy.
The Tooth Fairy Down Under. And you know what? I really have to, the Tooth Fairy Down Under, that's like a double entendre. Anyway, thank you for your help. I hope that you read my book about I'm sorry, I forgot it. This is Niswad, you're not bilingual. Entschuldigen Sie. My name is Trudy Schneider, and I'm the head librarian at the Manoa Library in Honolulu. Yeah, you might be saying, what, you sound Deutsch? And that's right, I'm Deutsch, but I fell in love with a Hawaiian. You know, those ukuleles, that's the music of love. Anyway, I became a citizen, I became a librarian, and I can't tell you what a special life that has been. I can't tell you how happy I am to introduce the next writer to you. Her name is Brandi Susan Myers, and I have read her books throughout the years. I'm always learning something. They are provocative, they are compelling, they are told with a very strong voice, page-turning like you can't believe. And I came across a quote of hers, but before I tell you that quote, her recent book, her most current book is called Wasted, W-A-I-S-T-E-D. And I know table 222 was wishing it was W-A-S-T-E-D. It's so wild. I think they're from Crow River. But anyway, here's a quote of Brandi Susan Myers that I just love. She says that when her children were little, she used to play a song for her daughters, "From Free to Be You and Me." And in the song, it swore that crying got the sad out of you. So she says that's kind of what writing does for me. It gets the sad, the mad, the glad out of me. So I am very glad to present Randy Susan Myers.
I'm going to put my stilts on. So, can you get some sense of the top of my head out there? From now on, I'm going to arrange all my makeup on the top of my head. It's wonderful to be here. For a girl who grew up in Brooklyn, this is very exotic, honestly. It's like, I never really knew it existed until I came here the first time. Sheila, you are a joy. Wherever you are, you're a joy. And where's Lorna? Yeah, you used to be a joy for me. And then you make fun of Guys and Dolls. I was in Guys and Dolls. An amateur production. I stripped on stage for the people. I was Adelaide, so now I know I give people strokes instead. I promise I won't take off my clothes. You will not suffer. So let me give you some fun facts for those of you who are over 30 in the audience, if there are any. I'm on my toes. This will be good. I got my, and also going off of Alan on how you can wait a while to meet your dreams. So I got my agent when I was 55. She sold my book when I was 56, and then I became a published author at 57. So, hey, things can happen, I never get so much applause as for being old. So my newest novel, Wasted, is my 5th novel, and yet it's the scariest book I've ever written. And in the past, I've explored domestic homicide, affairs, traumatic brain injuries, and Ponzi schemes. But writing Wasted is the one that terrifies me. Wasted tells the story of 2 women who torture themselves around issues of the numbers on the scale, and they're brutalized by others around weight issues. These are the questions that came to me. What's it like to have the scale be the scariest thing in the house? What if a woman's desire to be thin overrides everything in her life? Alice and Daphne, my main characters, seemingly so different, they confront the same issue. Both are damaged from fat shaming, by themselves, by others, and they are not these huge people. I mean, they're not skinny, and I don't even think it matters what size we are. We all suffer from shame around not looking like whoever the current ideal is. It doesn't matter whether it's, your hair, your nose, your face. They're so damaged that they willingly leave their family for a month, their children, and their jobs. Actually, that part didn't sound so bad to me. That was the dream part of it all. To take place in a project I think is going to provide a magic bullet. And then when reality hits that they're caught in a cruel experiment, then the job is to see, can they escape both from this place, and can they escape from their own totally unreal expectations. And I think we have very unreal expectations for ourselves. Daphne, one of the characters, is plump in a family of model thin women, something I know a lot about. And she learned in her mother's knee that only slimness earns admiration, something else I learned a lot about. For my mom, there was, the highest ideal was thinness. Alice is breakup skinny when she meets her husband, and she risks losing his love now that she's gone back to being who she is. Everybody know what breakup skinny is? Oh, yeah. And for those who don't, when you break up, you generally either gain weight or you lose weight. And I was lucky during my divorce and breakups, I always lost weight. And so recently I said to my husband, what about if we divorce for a little while? Year, not such a big deal. I think he's very dependent on me because he said no. The first line of the book, everyone hates a fat woman, but none more than she hates herself, reverberated in me for years. But I actually kept the words locked away because I didn't want to face my own story. And you know, we all face our own stories when we write books. We always bring the emotional essence and truth of ourselves into books, even if it's not at all autobiographical. But I knew that there was so much in my past. My mother and sister, as I said, were model thin, and everybody hears me. So can you all hear me? Oh, yeah. Yes. I move around like crazy. So my mother hid the cookies on top of the highest cabinet in our tiny little Brooklyn apartment, which in some ways was good because I learned how to become a mountain climber. I always do you remember those cakes? Did you have them here, the Entenmann's? Yes. Well, my sister and I, we learned how to scoop the frosting out from the middle. I mean, so she'd yell if we took slices. You just take that skinnier. Just a fun fact if you want to, steal a little food. I hid cookies in the bottom of the hamper and ate them in secret, sitting. Well, you know where you're going to sit if you're in the bathroom eating cookies. The tub, the edge of the tub. And blink if you've ever hidden food to eat. Okay. I remember my mom would ask whenever we were on the phone, we lived in different states at this point, and she'd always say to me in her Brooklyn accent, which I did not inherit, so, how's your weight? As though my weight were like this, thing I carried with me, like my little dog. Come on, weight, come on. Weight's fine, Ma. At my aunt's funeral, my beloved aunt, who had died after years and years of dialysis, I would be standing next to the coffin, and we had an open coffin, which is unusual in a Jewish family. And my Uncle Seymour, who I hope to never see again, looked over and he looked in it and he, shook his head like you do. You shake your head and he goes, "It's a shame." Of course it's a shame, she's dead. And he said, "She used to be stunning. Look how much weight she put on." Oh. This is what we face, ladies. And then he put his finger, his Uncle Seymour finger out and he goes, "You better watch out." I remember my grandmother on her 97th birthday. She got a nice big piece of birthday cake and she said, "Oh, I shouldn't." And she dropped her little saccharin tablet into her coffee. Was she waiting to finally zip up that size 2 dress she kept in the closet all those years? So gathering into this book meant having to really face a lot for myself, having to be honest, to stop dissociating that my whole being went up and down for how I looked and what my dress size was, and how I don't think I'm alone in the world with having a mother who judged me so much for how I looked. I remember I was in my 30s, and she came to visit me in Boston, and see, that was a little Boston accent through it. And the sun was shining, and she looks at me and she goes, "Are you going bald?" I was not going bald. So when you grow up being inspected, that's what my daughter's not called, being inspected, it's very hard. But then I felt the urge to open myself up to every loathsome thought, every thought that women have about themselves, and put it out there. Do the introspection that it would take, and wonder, could I face finally that my life was controlled by what I looked like, and could I get away from it? I didn't realize how tackling this subject could be so loaded. I loved writing this book. I loved my characters, and there's a big cast of characters at this reality show. And so I was at the Jewish community book tryouts. I don't know if anybody knows what this is. It's a weird thing where hundreds of authors go for 3 days to the Hebrew Union College in shifts trying out before a big audience of directors of JCCs, Jewish communities from all over the country. It's for 2 minutes, and they are like with this, counting it off. So you're watching the seconds go. So afterwards, you have a social, and I'm going around, and this guy comes up to me. He's the husband of one of the women, and he looks down at me because he's taller. What a shock! And he said, "I have something I want to say, but I'm not sure if I should." Well, what does it mean when a man says, "I'm not sure if I should say this"? Especially when he's a stranger. He goes, "I'm not sure you're fat enough to have written that book." And I said, "Oh, thank you, sir." So, before this, I had been very polite no matter what he said, because to him maybe his wife's going to bring me to Ohio. At this point, I don't care if I ever go to Ohio. And I said, so you're saying I'm fat, but not quite fat enough? What are you saying? He goes, no, we have to work this out, we have to talk about this. But now we're going to couples counseling? It's like he didn't know what to say about the book, and you got, by the way, my weight, usually up and down. I'm crazy. But through this book, I somehow learned to manage my crazy, which is amazing. I'm not saying I did it in a smart way, but I learned to manage it. Alice and Daphne and the other women of Wasted represent too many of us. We are judged and ignored or feted. Did I pronounce that right? Feted? What do you think? Librarian? Feted, thank you. Daily based on the quality of our appearance. And even in the most careful of families, girls get complimented on being beautiful and boys get complimented on being smart. I have to watch myself all the time. I meet a little girl, oh, you're so pretty. Like, why am I saying this? I am now aware, why do I say this as the first thing? One of the women that I spoke to about Wasted said her brothers were all given dessert and then she had to go down and do push-ups during dessert. And it was amazing how many women I've come up across where the brothers were allowed to eat and the girls weren't. I mean, although this was the only one I met who had to do push-ups. We're the decorations of the world, and we have to fight that all the time. So what do I hope that readers will walk away with after reading this book? Well, first of all, I love speaking in more detail about it. I do. If anybody goes to my website and you go to where it says for book club, not only do I have book club bonuses, but I love to speak by Skype with people because this topic, we can go on forever. But my hope now is that if people read the book, that this is what they take away, because this is what I took away. Beauty flees, waists expand, and wrinkles come. So these days I remember this and I really hold it to heart. Smart is beautiful, kind is magnificent, and wisdom can save the world, especially right now. And when I choose to eat the forbidden cake, I will not call it the forbidden cake. I will eat the damn cake, and I will never again eat it from the hamburger.
I think books like yours are helping to change society. And I do think things are changing, finally. I mean, even in this Grandview Lodge, I can't imagine any man getting up this morning and saying to his wife, "Oh, honey, do you think these plaid golf shorts make me look fat?" So we need books like that. Traveling across country, gee, where are we gonna land now? Shh. 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 Oh, I miss doing that. I really do. We're told not to anymore. We can't shush people in the library, but it used to be one of my most fun things. I've been a librarian in Stanley, North Dakota for 45 years. Shh. It's just a reflex, I'm so sorry. And I really am kind of a wild at heart woman. Oh. In fact, I called myself a cougar until my grandchildren said, "Don't say that, Grandma." But anyway, I like books about the great outdoors. I like books that take me into the mystery of all that lives beyond us. The night sky, the crickets, the wolves. So that is why I like Cary Griffith. His author picture's almost as cute as Mr. Eskin's. Now he wrote a book, his most recent, and it's called, and I have it right here, Gunflint Burning Fire in the Boundary Waters. And this is a non-fiction book about that fire in 2007. And it reads like a novel. I mean, I stayed up all night and twice I had to run in the kitchen to make sure I hadn't left the tea kettle on. He brought this horror to us, but in a good way, because you can close the book and you're still alive. Anyway, Mr. Griffith read a book in college read a short story in college, a Hemingway short story called Big Two-Hearted River, and it inspired him so much that he's been writing an hour or two every day since. He just graduated last year, that's not that big of a deal. Anyway, let's welcome him, Carrie Griffith.
In the near future. A lot of people don't know this about me, but 22 years ago, when I was 22, I moved from rural western Iowa to Minnesota. Now my Minnesota friends say, well, duh, of course you did. I moved up to the University of Minnesota to attend the School of Library Science and got my library science degree. It was the analysis of bibliographic literature for academic libraries. Yeah, deadly. I presented it to my advisor and she said, shoot me now. And so they wanted to get rid of me, so they gave me my degree. And so for the first 10 years of my life, I was a law librarian for a company down in the city's Control Data Corporation. I'm not a librarian anymore, but obviously I have a soft spot in my heart for librarians, the great priests and priestesses of our wonderful institutions, libraries. And I have a huge appreciation for libraries, especially how over the last 4 decades, our libraries have managed to reinvent themselves and make themselves relevant to the communities that they serve. So a big hand of applause for the Brainerd Public Library. And a huge hand of applause for you guys too, because you have all come out here today to support this excellent institution. And it's not just the 300 of you that are here today, but the almost 400 of you that were here last night. So thank you very much for coming. I refer to libraries as institutions of knowledge, and I think knowledge is power, and frankly, in this day and age, that's how we keep the barbarians at the gate. So thank you. I write books, both fiction and nonfiction, about wilderness. And I've always really enjoyed wilderness because dramatic things happen in wilderness. And few things are as dramatic as a wildfire, a forest fire. And so my latest book, which came out in 2017, Gunflint Burning, or it came out in 2018, it came out in paperback in spring of this year, is a book about the Hamm Lake Fire of 2007. Now I'm just going to tell you a couple of quick stories about that book. First of all, the title. As you can gather from my thesis title, I'm not very good at titles. Fortunately, I'm married to Anna, and so when I would bounce towards the end of the writing of Gunflint Burning, I would come up with these titles, and things like The History of the Hamm Lake Fire, Triumph, Turmoil, and Tragedy. I said, what do you think? What do you think? Anna went, what? Are you kidding? That's really lame. So I go back to the drawing board. And then one day she turned to me and she said, why don't you call it Gunflint Burning? I said, that's it. That's it. That's what we're going to call it. And then she said, that entitles me to half your proceeds. That's fine. Proceeds are thin for us writers. Anyway, the other story, not to bring you down, is about, there were several things. Let me back up. By the numbers, the Hamm Lake Fire was one of the largest forest fires in Minnesota in the last century, right? It was actually number 12 on the overall list of forest fires in Minnesota, but that's because a long time ago, more than a century ago, the big fires like Hinckley and the fire of 1918 and things like that, there wasn't the modern firefighting techniques, and they didn't have the resources to bring to bear on fires that we do today. And frankly, that was one of the things that interested me about writing about the Hamm Lake Fire. There were a few other things. It was extremely expensive. It was one of the most expensive fires in Minnesota history. By the numbers, it burned 144 structures. It cost an estimated $100 million, and the firefighting costs alone were $12 million. So it was significant. Now, even though it was the 12th largest on the list, one of the most intriguing parts of this story about the Hamm Lake Fire is that it was the only one of the top 12 that was started by a camper. And that intrigued me. I wanted to know a little bit more about it. And I'm just going to give you the cliff notes here. Now, actually, I write fiction and nonfiction, so most of the book is about the first 2 or 3 days when those 144 structures are burned, and the fire burns up through the end of the Gunflint Trail like the fuse to a powder keg. Most of it, and the way I write is I put readers in the middle of it. I put them in the heat and the smoke and the light and the rest of it. So that's the way I write. But there are 3 or 4 chapters in there about Stephen George Pozniak, the gentleman who started the fire. Now, when I researched Steve, I thought, in 2007 he was 62. He was a lot like me. Now, I told this to folks last night. Somebody came up to me afterwards and said, "You're 77? No. What I meant was I was 62 right before the book was published, so we were kind of the same age, close. But anyway, he was recently retired from the EEOC, and he loved the North Woods. He would come up there every year at the same time. This wasn't his first rodeo. This was his 27th year coming to the Boundary Waters. And he always did the same thing. He came the weekend before opening day of fishing season, and he pretty much had the woods to himself, although this time it was sort of an anomaly because the weather was unseasonably warm on May 3rd, 4th, and 5th of 2007. And those, usually he would go in for 2 nights, and he had another tradition on his last day, which in 2007 was on Saturday, May 5th, he would burn all his paper trash. Now, if you've been up into the Boundary Waters, you know the motto is leave no trace. You're not supposed to burn your paper. You're supposed to pack everything out that you brought in. But Steve thought this was a minor violation, like going over the speed limit or something. And he was also a news hound, so he usually had newspaper. He brought it all out, put it in the fire grate, burned it all. Now, and he thought it was out, and he went back because this was the morning. This was about 10 o'clock in the morning. This was the morning he was going to pack up all his supplies. So he goes back to his tent, which was pitched about 20 yards from the fire grate, and he went inside and started gathering his supplies. Now, the wind that day was gusting to 20 miles per hour, coming almost out of the due east. And I interviewed the fire investigator, Kurt Kogan at the time from the DNR, who went in 2 days after the fire started. The fire actually burned for 13 days. But he went in 2 days after to see where the fire started and to try to determine how it started. And he said, it was really interesting. That particular campsite was set up in such a way with the trees and stuff that when wind came through there, it actually created a circular motion, and that's exactly what happened. The wind came through, lifted an ember out of that campfire, picked it up, breathed new life into it, circled it around, and dropped it right into a copse of trees and debris that was right in the middle of the campsite. Now, something else I forgot to mention, that there was a near drought. The U.S. Forest Service had not issued a fire ban because it was so early in the season. The ice had just gone off of Seagull Lake, just down the Gunflint Trail the day before on May 4th. And there were still patches of snow around, so the possibilities of fire were low. But this one started, and by the time Steve packed up all his gear and got out, the fire was already out of control. Now he tried mightily to put it out, but to no avail. Now, as I mentioned, the rest of the story is about the firefight and the men and women who engaged in that firefight, and the resort owners and cabin people who lost their structures and continued to fight in spite of that. Huge altruism for the people in the Gunflint Trail. If you're looking for people that are altruistic, or whether or not altruism still lives in America, go up to the end of the Gunflint Trail in a tragedy like this one, and you'll find those people. So anyway, Steve, let's come back to Steve. So fast forward 18 months. A grand jury hands down a 3-count indictment on Steve, one of which is a felony. Now, before I wrote this book, I didn't realize that if you are convicted of a felony involved with a forest fire, you're liable for damages. Yeah, and you remember, now we're talking about $112 million. Now, none of us can really afford that except maybe Lorna. Where I'm talking about a lot of money, and that had to prey heavily on Steve as there was a flurry of legal motions through the fall of the next year. And finally, it came down to one last motion that Mark Larson, his lawyer, was filing for him. And if this one failed, he was going to have to go to trial in 2 or 3 days. And the motion was to dismiss all counts. It failed, and the next day, Steve died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound, which is a tragedy and terrible. And a lot of people have said there were no casualties. Amazingly, the firefighters told me this. There were no casualties in the Hamm Lake fire, but I beg to differ. I think the one casualty was Stephen George Posniak. And, the other thing, when I'm talking about altruism, no one I interviewed, and I interviewed more than 100 people up the trail. And again, these were resort owners, they were cabin owners, they were people who, visited the area all the time. And my wife and I coincidentally went up there just days afterwards, and I can attest the place looked post-apocalyptic. But I did not find a single person who blamed Steve Posniak. It was more the sentiment of Sue Prom, who was a resort owner. She owns Voyager's Canoe Outfitters at the end of the Gunflint Trail. And she said it could have happened to anyone. The elements were just set up in such a way that the fire got out of hand. So thank you very much for coming today. It's an honor or privilege to be here, particularly with Alan, Randy, Lorna, Christina, who you're going to hear from in a sec. These are excellent writers. I love all their books, and I really appreciate your support of an excellent institution in Brainerd. Thank you.
I see you brought a fly with you from the great outdoors. We talked further last night. That is such a tragic story about that camper. I have camped a lot, and you try to, be a good steward. Sorry, I'm a writer. And it seems like he did everything he should have, but so maybe we need a little cheer-up song. Don't you think? How about any requests?
We got an Avita.
That was actually my first concert. Thank you, Alan. How about the song Inagata DeVita is known for, You Are My Sunshine? Okay, I want to hear everybody, okay? You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't ever take my sunshine away. Very good. I especially like the bass notes that Table 25 and all those men added. Yeah. All right. We're now in Charleston, South Carolina. That's right. Well, come on. Where are all your hats? Where's the big hair? Anyway, my name is Dora Mae Williams. I'm the head librarian of the Charleston County Library. And you know, of course, as a librarian, you come across a lot of really, really good books. And some really, really good books that I've been reading lately are by Christina McMorris. And I'm telling you that her last book, which is called Sold on a Monday, I'm warning you, do not wear mascara when you read this book, because it will be smeared all over your face. It's heartfelt, it's heart-wrenching. And the thing about Christina's books is she's inspired by like a photograph or some letters or a clipping or a documentary film, and then she's so taken by that little bit of inspiration that she digs way, way deep into the background of that story. Why this picture? Why this documentary film? And she crafts stories from there that are so moving and so poignant, and she'll teach you things that you did not know about what's happened in this country. And it is a thrill to have her here tonight. Her hair's pretty big. It's pretty good. Yeah. Thank you. So let's welcome Christina McMorris.
Happened across my prom picture the other day, and let me tell you, it took some serious Aquavelva or whatever. Aquanet. Aquavelva may work too. That might have been my problem. So I am so thrilled to be here today. Thank you all so much for having me. I have to tell you that I just wrapped up, this is one of the very last events, a 70-stop book tour, which is also known as insane. It is, but after you have a couple kids, your brain cells deplete, so I blame them. And so on this trip, it was so much fun. My husband has been great about holding down the fort through all of that because he's from the Midwest, he's from Wisconsin, where all the cheese curds are, yes. And so he offered very kindly to come with me on this trip to help be my driver and my translator. Yeah. So I can tell you all, I now understand that a hot dish is a casserole. Yes, I love the nods, okay. And lutefisk is something I will never try. I got that description, I'm like, yeah, I'm good. Okay, thank you. So a little bit about my background as a writer. I truly call myself the accidental author for a lot of reasons. I never planned to be a creative writer. I used to be an event planner, a wedding planner. I did 14 weddings a summer. Yeah. So when I say I've seen hundreds of YMCA and chicken dances, that's not an exaggeration. What happened was, I went to visit my grandmother, who's from Iowa farm girl. She lives up on what she calls the Washington Hood Canal. Don't know where the R comes from. And she asked me to come up and visit, and I thought, this is a great opportunity to sit down and interview her, because I decided to make a homemade family cookbook full of her recipes that she had collected and created over decades. I'm sure a lot of you have those in your families, I'm sure. And almost as an afterthought, I thought I'd put a biographical section about her life, because it was just meant to be a Christmas gift for the grandkids. So I sat down and I interviewed her. She shared all kinds of amazing things about her life. They think, Grandma, why didn't you share this before? And you know her answer. Well, because nobody ever asked. Good point. Well, that day she shared lots of amazing things, but the best thing of all was that she shared that she and my late grandfather, whom I was very close to, I did not know until that day they'd only dated twice during World War II. They exchanged letters the entire time. He came home on leave from the Navy and proposed, and of course in that wonderful uniform. And then they got married, were married for 50 years until he passed away. And then she said, would you like to see the letters? And I said, why? Of course, it seemed like a trick question, so she pulled them out of the closet. Even my mother had no idea she had kept these. And we spent that afternoon poring over these beautiful yellow wrinkled pages from a 19-year-old sailor who didn't know if he'd be coming home tomorrow. And I still get chills when I think of that, because I had no idea that that day was going to change the course of my life. I left her house and I thought, wow, this would make a really good movie. It'd be like The Notebook meets Saving Private Ryan. And I thought, what if the soldier fell in love through letters, but it's a different girl writing back? Who would you know you were truly in love with? Cyrano de Bergerac or Match.com, set during World War II. I thought that's a movie I would go see. Fast forward a few years, I tucked this idea away in my brain somewhere. I am now pregnant with our second child. I am high on hormones. I'm creating life. Suddenly a book didn't seem that hard. I wish I was exaggerating. I remember calling my mother and saying, Mom, I'm thinking of writing this novel, World War II, because how hard can that be? Who needs to research that? And clearly she has an irrational amount of faith in her children, because her answer was, oh, honey, I think you should. So I sat down and I dove into writing this labor of love letter to the greatest generation. I gained so much respect for all the people who even stayed at home on the home front, and the people who served overseas, the men and especially the women I had never heard about. And I wrote this really, really horrible first draft that my mother loved, as she should. Unlike Ellen, I started collecting a lot of rejection letters. We probably could have saved postage if we just sent them out at the same time, actually. And eventually, after many, many, many drafts, sparing all my poor readers if they'd read early on, I ended up selling that to a large New York house, and it became Letters from Home, my first book. Now, from there, I started finding little nuggets of history that I think, how did I not know that before? People need to know this happened. And so I found everything from kids who grew up on Alcatraz Island as family of the prison staff, to 200 non-Japanese spouses who lived in the internment camps in the US voluntarily. They wouldn't be separated from their children or their spouses. These are people I never thought about. The Nazi spies who were dropped off by U-boat on the east coast of America in 1942. Secret military tribunals, J. Edgar Hoover, all kinds of scandal that I thought, how did I not hear about this before? And I ended up taking those and putting them into stories, hopefully for readers like myself that may not be, a textbook, what may not be the first thing that I would pick up to learn from. And I thought, what a great thing that I'm supposed to, Toni Morrison said, right, you're supposed to write what you want to read. And so that's what I started doing. Now that's what led me to my latest book. I was online one day researching for the Alcatraz book, and I saw that clickbait that said 50 of the most shocking historical photos you have never seen. And of course, as a historical writer, I think, what 50 photos have I never seen? Admit it, you've all clicked on it. I know you have. I'm not alone. Thank you. Okay. So I clicked, I went down the rabbit hole, and what I found was this photo. And that was pretty much my reaction to it. I had a visceral reaction as a mother, and I thought I could understand a mother possibly giving up their children because you thought they'd have a better life without you. I assumed it was the Great Depression, which I'm sure a lot of you do. It was not, actually, but I'll tell you more about that in a second. But I thought, how could a parent actually push themselves to ask for money in return? I didn't understand how you could justify that. And all the worst case scenarios came to my head, and all the judgments, without having any idea what they might have gone through. And then I started thinking maybe there was a compassionate reason. Maybe they needed to feed the other children. Maybe somebody was sick. Lots of reasons that I couldn't comprehend in today's world. And so it haunted me, and I started researching what was the true story behind the photo. I found a follow-up article that was written in the Northwest Indiana Times. It was soon after rerun in the New York Post about 6 years ago. And it was about these kids. There were actually 5 total. She had a baby soon after this photo was taken. And what happened was all 5 of them had grown up. Some of them had passed away now. And the ones that were alive were starting to reunite because of social media and finally telling their story. And one of them, Rayanne Mills, who is the oldest, the little girl in the white dress, she and I actually became friends after I wrote the book. She calls it now fondly our book. She asked if that was okay, and I said, oh, you better believe it's our book, Rayanne. And what she told me the first day I talked to her is what she told the reporter, and that is that one day in 1948, which again surprised me because I thought, wow, post-World War II. I wouldn't have thought of that. I would have never pictured this as the parade-filled, prosperous time that we like to picture as post-World War II, and of course it wasn't for everyone. And she said in Chicago at their apartment, a farmer and his wife came there, they knocked on the door after this photo was published, and essentially went viral. It ran in about 10, 11 states and all kinds of newspapers. It generated donations sent in and job offers, etc., that the mother actually all turned down, which I thought was interesting. And so, she said, the farmer came to the apartment 2 years later and offered to buy her to work as farm labor for a mere $2. She remembers her little brother starting to cry. He didn't want to be separated from his sissy. And so the farmer said, fine, we'll take him too for free. Her mother, she distinctly remembers making a comment about how she was going to use that money to play bingo. So it was not the story and the compassionate reasons I thought I was going to uncover. She later learned that her father was out of the picture. He was wanted for a crime in that county, so he never returned. The mother started dating someone else who did not want her children. She got rid of all 5 within those 2 years, whether selling them or giving them away, had a new family, and never looked back. And had no regrets. And I thought, oh my goodness, how am I supposed to write a story just inspired by this when that is so unbelievably sad? And I remember thinking, my husband came home and said, Chris, are you sure that you want to live with this for a year and a half? And you know, if you have a husband, he's really saying, honey, I don't want to live with this for a year and a half. And I don't blame him. Thankfully, I had an author friend named Stephanie Gray, who writes fantastic historical fiction, that kept calling me on a regular basis and said, you better not let go of this story idea. This photograph needs to be spread around. You need to tell this story. It will be a bestseller. See how she's trying to entice me? And I very darkly joked, you know what? It's so depressing, Oprah will love it. But I thought, you know, how am I going to tell this story in a way that is something new and different? Because Christina Baker Klein is a friend of mine who wrote Orphan Train. I'm sure you've all read it. And I thought, she's already done that wonderful story. Aside from the photo, it sounded like the same story to me. Lisa Wingate is a good friend of mine also who wrote Before We Were Yours, and that book hadn't come out yet, but I thought, oh my goodness, I wanted it to be different than any kind of book like that. So I went back to the newspaper one more time, and I read one sentence I had missed, and it said, some family members claim the photo was staged. So I looked back at the photograph again, and I'm sure you'll probably agree with me here, that sign is awfully perfectly painted. It has such perfect lettering, it has reflective marks on the letters, and I just could not picture this mother painting that. Now, that doesn't change what happened to these children, but it made me wonder which one came first. And so suddenly I knew I had my idea for a story. I knew the book was about a reporter who took a photograph of 2 kids during the Great Depression on their own farmhouse porch in rural Pennsylvania with a sign that reads, 2 children for sale. He snaps a photo, it is not meant for publication, and yet inadvertently it leads to his big break and has devastating consequences for everybody involved in the photograph. And he has to see with a female colleague who also feels partially responsible if it's too late to try to make it right. And so many of those topics you can imagine are relevant today. And so there are a lot of questions from the story that came up of moral questions and ethical questions that have been so much fun to talk to book clubs around the country about. And one of the most rewarding things, well, a couple of things. One that I have to tell you is that Rayanne and I became very good friends as a result. And just last week I got to call her and tell her that our book has just been on the New York Times list for 20 weeks, which is super, super cool. Because right before the book came out, I remember telling my husband I had almost an anxiety attack. And I thought, it's the closest thing to a panic I've ever felt. And I thought, this was a mistake. I should have written what everybody wanted, what was the trend. And I thought, I'm gonna write the next book as fast as possible so we could all forget this ever happened. I really did. And so it is so rewarding, but it's even cooler to know that Rayanne's story is now getting spread around even more. And we went on the Today Show together last fall to meet for the very first time because on our first phone call, she shared with me that she had had a baby as the result of an assault when she was on that farm as a teenager. She wanted to keep that child because she wanted the baby to know she was always loved and wanted, unlike herself. And yet, her foster mother agreed, and then 6 months later, 2 women came to the house and said one of them wants to hold the baby, so she handed it over and they walked out the door.
Oh my God.
She's never seen her daughter since, and on that phone call she said, "Is there any chance that you could help me find her?" And I thought, I had no idea where to start. You know, I make up stories for a living. And I said, "Well, have you ever taken a DNA test before?" Because I watch 20/20 and that's how they always do it. And she said, "I've always wanted to, but I don't have the means." And I said, "I'm going to send you a kit tomorrow." So we've been working together with them and the Salvation Army from the Unwed Mother's Home and a genetic genealogist, and I'm happy to say as of last week we have some promising leads. So keeping my fingers crossed, please send thoughts and prayers and all those good things, that I hope she gets to find her daughter, because it'd be pretty amazing to think that this photo may have haunted me for a much bigger purpose than telling just a story. So I hope you check it out, and I like to think of my books like I do all historical fiction, like with literary Advil, and that you get the sugar coating of a story on the outside, and hopefully you don't realize how much good stuff in history you're getting on the inside until it's over. So I hope you enjoy, and thank you again for having me.
That's it, people. Wow. Just to know how those many doors of imagination are opened, what opens them, what shuts them. It's been an honor and a privilege to hear all you. Our books will be for sale out there. You know, we support libraries, but we really support personal libraries. And now to top off the evening, or daytime, I told you I tippled last night. To top off the afternoon is the fabulous Sheila DeChantel, who has been the birth mother of all of this. She has just seen it for 7 years, and I think it's one of the best literary events in the country. I really do.
Yeah.
So, Sheila!
So as a thing I like to say, I tend to sign myself up for things. I've done this for a long time. I think things sound interesting. Like last year biking for Rape Ride across Iowa. Why wouldn't you? What a great experience. I love experiences, and I do this to myself all the time, and I sign up, and then as the date gets closer, I think, what have I done? But I love the experience, and so I have a little thing that I like to say. I go, oh, well, it's tomorrow. I guess I'm doing this. So yeah, I actually write for a website that's called that. I guess I'm doing this. And so here we are, 7 years. Guess we're doing this. So I just want to thank you all. This is amazing. Year 7, year 1 was 180 people, one day at Arrowwood. And we grew to the point of outgrowing there. We moved here. And it's just amazing. Looking at this group, you know, you were 100 over our first year, and that's not counting what happened last night. So thank you so much. I want to say that, well, what was it, birth mother? Well, I may be birth mother. It takes, obviously, many people to make this happen. One, I want to thank our amazing authors who did this last night and got up and did it again today. Thank you. What I found was a lot of the authors that were flying in or traveling, since they were here, they would turn around and then do another event today, somewhere in Bemidji or the cities or Duluth, to kind of make, you know, kind of this little Minnesota adventure. And I thought, I bet we can just do this 2 days in a row, and they don't have to travel. They can stay here. We're probably offering a bigger. I meant to say bigger, but clearly I said better crowd. Bigger crowd. They don't have to travel and waste that time in the car, and I mean, it's not like Grandview sucks or anything, so why not stay here? So this has been really fun, and I always figure, okay, so our team has been working. I think I start looking for authors in February, and then it's just kind of low key for a while, just kind of play cheerleader for a while as I engage them and keep them. And then the team starts getting involved, and we've got like Sherry and a bunch of people that go out and get, you know, donations. And then we've got our team, like Sue's working on seating. Gail really helped a lot with our auction. There's just so many people, I don't even dare try to name them all because I couldn't, that really step up and make this happen. The behind the scenes work is insane. But it's all worth it, obviously, to get to this point. So I just wanted to thank you again. I am going to announce our little prizes with the help of Miss Krista. So if you did buy, way back here, if you did buy a duck, we do have some fun giveaways. We have a $50 gift card to either Prairie Bay, Iron Range, or Eatery, which is in Crosby. What's that other one? Sherwood. Not Doc. No, Doc is actually not a Three Cheers restaurant. It's separate. Yep, those three. Number 111, if that is on your duck. Yep, I see somebody excited in the back. So, the ducks are kind of just something we started year one. I'm not even sure why, but they're kind of fun. I think because I found them and most of them are reading. I think that's kind of cool. So that's why we do that, and that's why we continue to do that. At the end of the event, unless you feel, you know, really close to your duck, and I will not question that, you may take it, but if you leave it, then we just reuse them for future years. The wine glasses, however, I do want you to take. So that is your gift. That is part of your ticket. That is wonderful advertising for us, and to remind you that April 1st, 2020, tickets will go live again. Our next winner is for a $20 gift card to Von Hansen Meats. It's in Baxter. Wonderful place. And that is number 6. Oh, yeah. I think it's because Lorna called them out about the singing. And then our final item for the ducks, we always give away a Kindle Fire because that is compatible with the ebooks at the library. So if you want to check out ebooks, if you haven't tried that, it's kind of an amazing thing that our library now offers. Number 28. Woo, super close. So something fun that was new this year was that beautiful art piece that we had outside the auction. If you've been to the Brainerd Library lately, and you see that we actually have those out in front of the library. They're beautiful, and that artist donated one for last night and one for tonight. So that person is, that's a white ticket. If you got those tickets, 716267. That was kind of fun this year is I asked our authors if they would each donate 2 copies of their most current book, the one they talked about today. And last night we did this, and we're doing it today. So thank you. For those of you who bought one of the cards, this is what that winner will get. So everyone who bought a card, if you want to stand up, and I'm going to let Krista take it from there.
All right, if you have a red card, you need to sit down. If you are holding a spade, you need to sit down. If you are holding a jack, queen, king, or ace, you need to sit down. If your number is higher than 6, you need to sit down. Or need to be held up. If your number is lower than 3, you need to sit down. winner is 5 of clubs. The silent auction closed and the names are going to be up here. But there is somebody that won a silent auction, they didn't put their number bid down, and we can kind of read their name.